Access Federation, or log in via Tirakiri, which is a New Zealand federation. So I come to this login page, I'll click on the login button. It sends us off to this discovery service. This is where the user, and it lets me use the particular tool. And in this particular tool, I have access to, what have I got access to? Some compute stuff. Let's look at my overview. So this is my trend. This is how many units that I've used in the past 3 months. And it's allowing me to do some compute stuff. It's got some network. So it's just a basic tool that I can then fire up virtual machines, and these are all my virtual machines that I've got. I do a lot of IDP testing on various operating systems. I've got a couple of Jagger instances here. So it's basically a playground for me to test and develop stuff that's suitable for our federation. So that's what a user would see when they log in to such a service. And we have like hundreds of these different services all connected to the federation. So the big benefit for the users is they're using their same username and password issued by their university to log into a raft of services in the federation. So what does it look like more from a technical perspective? From a service provider, they have to provide the login button that triggers a SAML authentication. That includes registering their service in the Federation registry. And we have a tool called Federation Manager, which is this URL, which allows the service provider to register their endpoints, their certificates, their required attributes, contact information, and other stuff related to their technical instance of their service. The service provider then needs to then consume the Federation metadata. Our Federation metadata is provided here. We'll have a quick look at that shortly. And it includes all the IDPs and service providers in the AAF. So the Federation is a conglomerate or an aggregate of all of our entities provided in a single file. And each IDP and service provider consumes that so they know who else is in the Federation. And they trust that metadata because it's signed by us, and they have a verification key so they can verify that the metadata hasn't been changed in transit or in some other way before it gets to them. And they also need to determine what the user's entitled to. So as you saw, I was entitled to create services or virtual machines at that Nectar service. Other users might be able to create Kubernetes clouds. Also depends on the service. It might be a data providing service where I'll get access to certain data sets, but not others. Generally, authorization occurs at the service provider, and it's generally based on the user's attributes. So just a quick look at our Federation Manager tool. Again, it's got our login here, very similar to before. I'll log in with the Australian Access Federation. I'll select my home organisation. But this time I didn't actually go to my login page because I'd already logged in to the Nectar service. So I remembered that, so single sign-on is in effect here. This is our Federation Manager tool. It has all of our organisations listed. And under here, if we say look at the next page, we go to our peak university, Australian National University. We can see that this university is providing one identity provider and has 40 services registered in the Federation. We can sort of troll down into these. We can have a look at Enlighten, whatever that may be. And it's got some overview information about the service. It's got a bunch of SAML information. It hasn't got any resolver services, but it's got some consumer services. So there's some endpoints registered there, some certificates used in the SAML transactions. It's got some contact information. It's got discovery response. So it's got a whole bunch of stuff that's recorded about this federation. Our metadata service, this is another simple tool that we provide, and it provides 3 metadata documents. This metadata document here is the aggregate for all of the Australian Access Federation. The second one here is our aggregate for services that have come from the EduGain conglomerate that are acceptable for consumption by the AAF. So we actually filter our metadata as it comes in from EduGain. And this is our third metadata, which is information on entities that are sent out to join EduGain. Not all of our IDPs or all of our services are in EduGain yet. So the service provider's got a bit of work to do. The identity provider also has some work to do, but we'll skip past that because we're not concerned really about what the identity provider is doing at the moment. It's more about how we get services to work, and attributes are one of the most important things that are needed to ensure that the service will work effectively. The release of users' attributes from an identity provider to a service provider helps ensure that the service works effectively. With no attributes, the service provider has no idea who the user is. All they've got is some sort of confirmation that somebody's logged in successfully at an identity provider. It cannot provide any personalized experience for the user. So without attributes, the user's just a nobody. It cannot contact the user in an out-of-bounds method. So if there's no email address provided, there's no way that the service can email the user that some event has occurred or something's ready for them for processing or whatever it is that the service may want to do. It won't be able to do any authorization. It cannot provide any useful business intelligence information about what the usage is of that particular service. And it effectively reduces security because you have no idea who's logging in. If you don't know who's logging in, there's no way you can go back and say, that was a bad actor that's logged in. How do we sort of address that particular security incident? So attributes are very important for the use of federations. And we've got another little tool here called our attribute validator. And this is just a tool that we've written to show all the attributes that can be potentially got from a service, from an identity provider. Now this one's in our test environment, but you might just change that to be production. So we've been logged into production before. Go to that one. Looks exactly the same, just doesn't have the word test in it. And I click on show me my attributes. Again, log into the virtual home. And again, it just skips straight past the authentication part because it's already done the authentication previously in this session. And here we can see a number of attributes that have been provided about myself. This is a unique identifier. This is my name. These are my affiliations. I'm not actually a student, but I can change that so I can do testing. Some assurance stuff, which is out of date. We're updating that soon. My principal name, just another identifier in a different format. Another identifier, the target ID, which has been deprecated, so I'm trying to remove that. Our email address, my first name, the domain of my organisation, the type of my organisation, the user-friendly name of my organisation, and on it goes. So we have many attributes that are basically available to a service provider when they log into identity providers in the AAF. These ones are our core attributes. We'll talk about that a bit later. We have a conditional attribute, and that's the person's ORCID value. It's conditional. It will possibly one day become a core attribute, sort of working its way up. And we have a bunch of optional attributes. So my UID, my phone number, and my common name. And there's a whole raft of other attributes that can be supplied, but generally aren't supplied by our identity providers, but they're there just in case a identity provider does want to provide them and make them available to services. Get rid of that. So services really require attributes to work, and to work well, they need a good range of attributes to be able to select from. So this is just my opinion, but I think all federations should have a list of core attributes that are available to their federations members. For the AAF and many others that are more later national federations do have core attributes, and for us, these attributes, the descriptions are listed in our federation rules. And we actually have a rule that says that all identity providers must collect or generate the core attributes of the AAF. So all of our service providers can be fairly reliant on getting attributes that are core or have been defined as core. And we do from time to time increase those attributes. We add additional ones, and we have deprecated at least one so far. The common name has been deprecated down from a core attribute to a optional attribute. It's no longer considered core anymore. There's other ways to get that information. It did have a special characteristic that it was meant to be just the first name space surname. That made it a bit more difficult to deal with, so we've actually got rid of that attribute as a core attribute. Still there if somebody still wants to use it, but it's not recommended anymore. So as I said, most federations don't have a core set, or if they do have a core set of attributes, it's a very thin set of attributes, very small list. And a lot of the reasons that have been put forward for why they don't provide a big core set of attributes are privacy and security concerns at the universities, at the IDPs. A lot of the UK and EU and US universities are very reluctant to release personal information about their users. So they generally don't, which makes it difficult for service providers to run effectively. GDPR has also had an influence on this, and how the EU deals with users or people's personal information is very much governed by GDPR now. That also makes it difficult for the release of attributes from universities about their users without their full consent. So why does it make it difficult for service providers? Because in these situations where no attributes or minimal attributes are released, the service provider must negotiate with each IDP for access to the user's attribute, generally through some sort of contract mechanism, and that's not a very scalable idea for either the federations, for service providers at a federation level or a global level. So new policies and technology solutions are required, and REFEDs have come to the rescue with a number of solutions that help service providers get the attributes that they need to function correctly. So just a quick recap, we did this yesterday. So what is REFEDs? REFEDs is the Research and Education Federations Group. It's an international community addressing the needs of existing and emerging identity federations in the education and research sector worldwide to collaborate on policy issues. And REFEDs operates under the GANT Association umbrella and is funded by its sponsors. The AF is a sponsor of it, and many other federations also pay some money and contribute some time and effort into the operation and upkeep of REFEDs. They've also got some critical success factors: a sustainable standards development process and adoption, meeting attendance and community representation, and supporting education and educating stakeholders. REFEDs have, as part of their job, has been to define specifications, and they have provided a raft of specifications. We'll go through each of these in turn and look at how they affect how service providers can operate effectively, and therefore researchers can collaborate and work in this space to their best ability. Let's just have a quick look at this page first. So this is the REFEDs specifications page. It's accessible from the REFEDs site, and it's got each of the federations, each of the specifications listed. It's got some specifications that I'm not covering in this presentation, but if you want to dig into it more, you can. Specifically, the hide from discovery, and what was the other one? Error handling. They're more just very technical specifications, but if you're interested in what they do and what their effects are, you can have a look at that site. I've broken the federation, the specifications down into various groups. The first one is trust. So the baseline expectations is all about trust and how we ensure that, or increase the level of trust across the whole of the global federation space. The next two are about security, certify and security contact. Those two we discussed yesterday. They're about how to transmit sensitive security-related information between players in the federation space. Attribute release, there's 5 specifications around this, and we'll dive into those in detail. And then finally, assurance. And this is about how well we know our researchers, or how well we know our users within our community. So before I go any further, are there any questions just about what federations are and why attributes are so important, and why I'm spending so much time just looking at these specifications? So as we go through today, I'm just going to sort of stop and ask for any questions, because it's just to break it up a bit. If we have no questions, I'll carry on. So the first of the specifications that REFEDs have, that I'm going to talk through about, which is a REFED specification, is the baseline expectation. And this is just a list of required operational behaviours for identity providers, service providers, and federation operators to meet identity federation baseline expectations for a common trust framework. So it's things we should be doing on a day-to-day basis that will lift the level of trust across the whole of the federation space. It's about building and maintaining trust, and your federation rule set or policies are based on how to build the baseline expectations for your federation and its members. So we've recently changed our federation rules to be more in line with the baseline expectations as we start to roll this out to our members across the AAF. And you should also be considering for your own federations how to ensure that your rules are aligned with the baseline expectations, because if everyone's playing the same game, then it will make it easier to collaborate, for researchers to collaborate and work together. So the baseline expectations, it's just a number of high-level statements that your various entities are expected to comply with. And for identity providers, there are 5 such statements. And the first one of these is your identity provider is operated within organisational level authority. And for us in the AF, we're automatically giving that a green tick for all of our identity providers, because each identity provider, when they join the federation, has got to have sign-off from their CIO or above in their organisation to say that they are happy to participate as an identity provider in the federation. So they've got that high level of organisational authority to do so. Similarly with the second one, the identity provider is trusted enough to be used to access your organisation's own systems. And for the AAF, most of our universities, or actually all of our universities, their identity providers are core to their infrastructure and are used either to directly access organisational an organisation's systems or as part of the organisation's identity management infrastructure. So everyone gets a green tick there. Third one, you publish contact information for your identity provider and respond in a timely fashion to operational issues. We've made a minor change to our Federation rules to include the respond in a timely fashion. We already had a section in our rules about publishing contact information and keeping that fresh. So that's fairly simple. The next one is apply security practices to protect user information, safeguard transaction integrity, and ensure timely incident response. So again, our Federation rules have been updated to align with those requirements. And we're also implementing certify across the Federation, particularly when an entity joins EdgeAgain. So join EdgeAgain, we expect them to be compliant with the certify requirements. At the moment, certify is just self-asserted, so they just self-assert that they're doing everything that's in that specification that we spoke about yesterday. And finally, we ensure that their metadata is registered in the Federation is complete, accurate, and up-to-date. Again, our Federation rules helps in that space, and we're also improving our own Federation management tooling to ensure that whatever's published about an identity provider is accurate, complete, and up-to-date. So that's all the IDPs have to do. Once they've done that, we can say, yes, you're compliant with the baseline expectations. We're also looking at making this part of our yearly compliance. So they agree to comply to our Federation rules, and because of that and some other little bits and pieces that they need to do, we should also be able to say that all of our identity providers are meeting the baseline expectations. Okay, moving on. The service providers, they have a similar list of things. They have one extra to deal with, but most of these are very similar. But the first one is a little bit different in that they need to ensure controls are in place to protect users' privacy in the service. So the identity provider is releasing privacy information about the user. Service provider needs to be have controls in place to protect that. So that's a little bit extra. They're also expected not to share that information about users with third parties without the relevant consent or notification. And information is stored only whilst it's necessary for operational purposes. They also publish contact information, respond in a timely fashion. They apply security. They ensure their metadata is registered. And the extra one here is they publish requirements for user information. So why they need users' attributes and information for the service. So this is a lot of GDPR sort of stuff sort of starting to bubble up through here, but it's at a global level. So service providers got a little bit extra to do, but similar sort of stuff. Federation operators, nobody gets a free pass for this baseline expectations. We as Federation operators need to focus on trustworthiness of the Federation as our primary objective and are transparent about such efforts. And, we run a website that helps in making that possible. We run a service desk. There's a number of things that we can help to improve the trustworthiness of our Federation for our members. Secondly, we publish contact information, respond in a timely fashion. That's common across all three areas. Apply security patches, follow good practice to ensure authentic, accurate, and interoperable metadata. We implement support frameworks to improve trustworthiness and scale the use of the Federation, and to promote the adoption by members and other participants. And finally, we collaborate with other organisations to promote realisation of baseline expectations nationally and internationally, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm doing FO6 by promoting baseline expectations to the people in the room. So baseline expectations is fairly straightforward. It's not too much involved if you're running your Federation in a best practice way at the moment. you might need to just go and have a tap on everyone's shoulder to make sure that they're doing the same at the universities. So any questions on baseline? It's fairly straightforward, and there's lots of information again on the REFEDs site that will help guide you and move you forward to ensuring all of your identity providers, service providers, and your federation operator are doing baseline effectively. Next one is security or certifying security contacts. We spoke about this yesterday. Certify, just a bit of a recap. It's a security incident response trust framework for federated identities. Apply basic operational security protections to your federated entities in line with your organization's policies and priorities. You patch, manage vulnerabilities, detect intrusion, manage access, and log events. You're willing to collaborate in responding to federated security incidents and notify others when you realize that an incident impacts them. You respect users' privacy and use a traffic light protocol with other certified participants. And you publish your contact information, your security contacts, and self-assert a certified tag in your metadata so that others know to trust that you are doing certified. And coordinate with your federation operator to publish in the federation metadata. So just basically do certify, and it will make things easier for resolving security incidents. So any questions about certify? Just a quick run through what we did yesterday, but certify is there to provide a mechanism to communicate securely and privately with other participants in the federation space. Okay, so next, moving on to attribute release. REFEDs have defined 5 entity categories, which I'll talk about shortly. This is 5 policies effectively, or guidelines on how to successfully release attributes from identity providers to service providers where they generally weren't in the past able to do so in a broad sense. So the policy approach is to help resolve the lack of sharing of attributes. It uses or utilizes SAML entity categories to implement this stuff. So SAML entity categories is part of the SAML standard. So something you stick into the metadata to indicate that you either support this entity category or you require the entity category, or the outcomes of being a part of that entity category. These policies are, however, meant to be technology agnostic, so they should be able to also be applied to things like OpenID Connect when we start to roll out an OIDC global federation. I think that's getting closer and closer as we speak. Generally, the IDPs agree to support entity categories, particularly the use of attribute release. And if they do indicate through publishing in their metadata that they do support a particular entity category, they must provide the attributes that are requested from the bundle of attributes defined in that entity category. There's no, oh, we won't do it, we'll do it for everybody except you. It's just going to be across the board. We will provide attributes that are in the bundle for any service that is also requesting access to that entity category. For service providers, they need to apply to access the entity category, and they must meet the registration criteria. And we'll look at each of those in a bit more detail shortly. And the entity's metadata is used to exhibit support for or access to the entity category that's sort of negotiated with your federation operator. So it's the federation operator that will publish your metadata. You need to, as a service provider, ask your federation operator to be part of an entity category, or as an identity provider to be indicate that you are willing to support an entity category. So we'll just dive into each of these entity categories quickly. First one's research and scholarship. This one's been around for a long while. It's got very good uptake of support from both identity providers and use by service providers that are entitled to use it. So we quickly dive into identity providers, or for identity providers, sorry, excuse me. Hopefully this will work. So this is part of the knowledge base that REFEDs have provided about this particular ND category called research and scholarship. And REFEDs is asking all institutions that have identity providers within the RNS Identity Federation space to support RNS. The research and ND category. And these are the reasons why. So research and education identity federations are designed to protect the privacy of users, which means only personal information that is strictly necessary is passed to services that help you access that service. So again, making sure that the service has the right information, but the minimal right information to access. Many services support research or scholarly collaborations have a proven need for a small set of personal attributes to provide the desired service. For example, a grant system might need your name and email address to communicate information about your grants. REFEDs have identified a small set of attributes that work for a large majority of our research and scholarship services. These are name, email address, unique identifiers for users. The challenge for institutions using identity federations is working out which service providers have genuine need for these attributes and configuring an attribute release policy for each service. So trying to reduce the overhead for identity providers. So RNS addresses this problem. The audit of service providers is done by your federation against legal requirements, and attribute release is automatically applied to the service, decreasing the overhead of identity providers and barriers to access for your users. And to find out more, we can go back to that, the REFEDs website. So let's have a look at the requirements for federation operators accessing RNS. So if you're a federation operator and you want to assess that a service is considering using the RNS category, here's a bit of a checklist that you can use to do that. So have a clear assessment process for your service providers. Can the service provider demonstrate that they are meet the definitions of RNS? So are they candidates for the research and scholarship category? Are they operated for the purpose of supporting research and scholarship interactions, collaboration, or management? At least part. Can the SP demonstrate a desirable need for the use of the full RNS bundle? Is there a relevant, appropriate relationship between the data subject and the service provider? And so on. There's a raft of things that, as a federation operator, you should be checking and verifying before you go and say, yes, this service can have the RNS tagging. A lot of work has been done by the REFEDs group to make this easy to use, or easier to use than having the service provider go out and ask each and every identity provider they want to work with, can we have attributes for your users? The main issue with this particular entity category is that it's restricted to research and scholarship services. It's not available to commercial service providers. And that generally means publishers, which a lot of federations will be wanting access to. So RNS, lots of folk are doing it. It's fairly straightforward. It releases attributes about folk. The next one is anonymous access.
Hello.
And there are three of these.
Yes, Terry, I
Yep.
have a
Sorry.
question about the attributes. So, is there any standard list that need to be defined on all IDPs to work with most of the publishers or and the the commercial applications that you're talking about?
Yeah, so if you actually look into the research and scholarship entity category, which we'll do now, this one has the largest list of attributes. And if you look for, there'll be a section called attribute bundle. And in here, it's talks about shared user identifier, person's name, their email address, their affiliation, principal name or principal name and target ID, display name, surname and given name, email address, and affiliation is the entity person scoped affiliation. So those 6 attributes or 7 attributes are the sort of minimum that is required. There's a core set of attributes.
Okay. So, actually, last week I was trying to access some service provider from the Sweden that the, 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 the service provider to do is that verify the
So I can
documents.
hardly hear you. Can you? I'm not sure if it's my speaker or
Yeah,
if it's
can you hear me now?
only just.
Yes, actually, I was trying to access some service provider from Sweden that is used for signing of the documents. It was sent by Casper to us for some signing of the document.
Oh, yes, I did that. I got Heath to do that too.
Yeah, actually, I was not able to access it because there was some attribute was missing. It was edu person assurance attribute that was not going from my IDP. So,
Ah,
is it
that's
part of the
interesting.
RNS bundle or not?
So education assurance was missing, but is that in the bundle? It's affiliation. I'm pretty sure that service was a research and scholarship service. It may have been it may have been using personalized. We can come back and have a look at that
Yes, yes.
after the
Okay.
thing, but they would be using a entity category, which I'll be talking about, or one of the future ones, which does require assurance, and I'll be talking about the assurance attribute shortly. Okay, so we're going to go back to that. So just moving on, we've got the anonymous access. This one's for publishers that just need to know that where a user's from, their organization, and the type of user that they are, so their affiliation. And access is based on proof of successful authentication. And this one, the attribute bundle is fairly small. It's just the organization and the affiliation. So that's a fairly simple one to do. The next one's pseudo-anonymous. This one's for publishers who just want to know where a user's from, the type of user, some sort of anonymous or pseudo-anonymous identifier, and a level of identity assurance. So that's what you were just asking about, I think. Sorry, back that up. So the assurance, if they're using this particular entity category, they'll be looking for an assurance value. And access is based on successful authentication and offers personalization based on a pseudo-anonymous user identifier. So what's that mean? It means that when the user comes back to the service, it can remember that what the user has previously visited, what data sets they've requested, what accesses they've made, but doesn't have any real idea of who the user is. There can just be a bit more of a personalized experience or a better experience without having the personal information being provided. The next one's personalized access, and this may be what Casper is actually looking for. Again, this has for service providers that have proven need to receive a small set of personalized identifiable information about the user in order to effectively provide the service. and a signing service would probably fall under this one. Where they want the organization, a user's identifier, so they can know who the user really is, their real name, their email address, their affiliation, and again, their assurance value. So what level of identity assurance has occurred for this person. This is really a version of research and scholarship with less restrictions. So it's not restricted to just research activity. It can be any service provider that meets the requirements. Code of conduct, and we'll come back to assurance shortly, but code of conduct is both attribute release and best practice. It supports attribute release within GDPR regions, and there is a global version of this particular entity category around, but it's had very little uptake beyond the EU because it's very complex. So I'm just going to sort of skip over this one, but this one basically says whatever the service wants and they have a reasonable need for it, then happy to release the attributes. So assurance, this is some of the trickier stuff. The REFEDs team have defined 3 assurance entity categories, if you like, or profiles. And this is really about how well do you trust the user who just logged in is really that user. So there's 2 aspects to be considered here. How strong are their credentials that they've just used? Are they easily guessable? Are they phishable? Or are they strong? Are they well protected against those easy guessing or phishing type attacks? We're looking for strong credentials. We're also looking at how much effort the organization has done to verify that the user's identity, or the user is who they, verify the user's identity when they join the organization or during the time that they're at the organization. So do they look at identity documentation? Do they take that identity documentation and get it verified by the issuer of that documentation? Are there police checks involved? What other identity checking is going on when a researcher or a user is joining a organization? And how much effort is the home organization putting into doing those checks? So those are the things we'll look at next. The first one is the single factor authentication profile. It's got a URL which is published in as an authentication context, so it becomes part of the infrastructure. There's a lot of supporting material around this. And this one is how strong is your password? How good a password? What good password policies have been applied to your password? So our minimum length, number of characters that the user can use to select their password from, all those good practice things. How frequently is it refreshed or renewed? There's a whole raft of activities that are wrapped around the single factor authentication profile. But unfortunately, it's rarely used because it's not really that strong. It's just saying, have you got a strong first factor authentication password? But it does, however, use the authentication context to signal that in the authentication request from a service provider to an identity provider that strong single factor authentication is required. I don't know if anyone is actually using this particular profile at the moment because everyone just skips straight to the multi-factor authentication profile. And also the single factor may eventually disappear over time as we move to passwordless authentication. So passwordless is no password, so there's all that single factor stuff disappears. The multi-factor profile is much more interesting and much better, or much more effort is being putting into actually implementing the multi-factor authentication profile.
Yes,
And it similarly has a URL that will appear in the authentication
Just Terry, can you hear me?
requests, which we'll have a look at shortly.
Hello.
And there is much more supporting material around the
Hello.
multi-factor authentication.
Yes.
Yep.
The study, I have a question about this multi-factor authentication. So in Shibboleth, can we use multi-factor authentication, and or we have to deploy some other third-party tool with Shibboleth to use it?
You'll need some third-party tools. So Duo works. We've got our virtual home uses the Google Authenticator. So we've got a plugin for Shibboleth with the Google Authenticator that works. Or you can use a Shibboleth IDP as a proxy to something like Entra, and then use Entra's multi-factor authentication to do the signaling do the multi-factoring.
So it is possible with Shibboleth, but with extra configuration.
Yep.
Okay. Fine.
And I'm happy to run a workshop after the conference about how to set that up, and because we've been doing a lot of that work within the AAF. So if you have an interest in that,
Yes,
I think we can run a virtual program to have a day or so just going through how to configure Shibboleth up to do multi-factor authentication.
Okay. Yes, it will be helpful.
Okay. So as I said, we're currently rolling this out across the AAF. This is what we're doing. So over the past few years, Australian universities have been enabling multi-factor for their users population. So most researchers, students and staff at the universities will be doing multi-factor authentication already, but just on their campus IDPs. And they'll be using their vendors' products. So we've got a lot of Microsoft Azure, AD, we've got Okta, we've got some Duo, Ping Federate, some F5 access, all sorts of stuff that's operating on campus for the users. But all of our IDPs, all of our organizations also have a Shibboleth IDP that fronts up to the Federation. It's about why multi-factor. It's what everybody's doing. If a hacker gets your UQ account, as an example, they could potentially obtain access to sensitive university data or your personal information. Consequent data breaches have severe personal, business and financial implications. Having multi-factor, it doesn't matter if they get one factor, if they can't get the second factor, this whole quote just disappears. It's not a problem, or it's less of a problem. So multi-factor is good. Everyone's now realizing it's good, and all universities in Australia are doing something about ensuring that all of their users are doing multi-factor authentication. Most universities are doing multi-factor for all users across all services. So that's what we're recommending that they do on premise. And we're also recommending they do multi-factor for connecting to the AAF and to the Federation. So everything means everything. Anywhere a user can log in with a university credential, corporate systems, faculty, schools, department systems, and external systems, including the AAF, using a single multi-factor solution. So you want one multi-factor solution, not many. Connecting to the AAF and EduGain via a Shibboleth IDP. So we've got a couple of options here. Our rapid IDP proxy mode, which is basically Shibboleth. The authentication is handed off to your enterprise IDP where multi-factor authentication occurs. For on-premise IDPs, we configure to either use a proxy to your IDP or have a plugin. So there's Duo. Shibboleth is also coming up with its own passwordless authentication option, which I expect will be available by the end of the year. Or the service provider provides its own multi-factor, and we don't recommend that because that's just another multi-factor that's going to annoy researchers rather than using the university provided multi-factor. But it also depends on how quickly you can roll out multi-factor to your universities and to your service providers to make use of that. So multi-factor protects your users. Most energy is gone into getting users using a multi-factor solution, adding MFA to single sign-on, getting users to install an authentication app, dealing with those users who don't want to. So a lot of universities have found some small cohorts that don't want to engage or work on or have a multi-factor option.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Sorry.
Okay. So I have a question that in your federation, are there any universities that are using third-party IDPs for they are not using Shibboleth or using some third-party like Azure or Okta, Ping Federate? Are there any universities that are using that?
So most of our universities are using Okta or Shibboleth, but they also, Okta or Azure or Ping, but they also have a Shibboleth IDP to connect to the federation.
So if we take any commercial IDP, we still have to install Shibboleth to work as a proxy to work with this Edugen Federation.
Yes.
Okay.
We've just found that simpler.
And can we use Azure for multiple universities? For example, if we have one Azure on which there are multiple domains, can we use that Azure as a single IDP to proxy multiple universities?
I think so.
Because
we have a number of universities that have two tenancies, one for staff and one for students. And they sit behind a single Shibboleth IDP.
Okay.
So there's a little mini discovery service that sits on the IDP itself to say, where are you from? Are you a student? Are you a staff? You'd probably have to have a similar thing saying, are you from University A or B or C or D?
Yes, because in Azure, you know that we can host multiple domains, multiple universities can be possible on one Azure. So I was thinking that if it's possible to integrate a single Shibboleth in front of it as a proxy, and we can use it as a single sign-on or as a IAM for our federation.
Yeah, I think you could do something like that. We'd have to sort of sit down again and have a good thrash at it and see what it actually looks like. But I think that would be possible.
Okay, I will discuss you separately.
Yep. Okay, so for most of our universities, the biggest job is to actually get it done. And most of our universities are either all the way there or very close to getting there with rolling out their multi-factor authentication. So are we done yet? No, there's more. We want to be able to request that multi-factor is required and be informed that multi-factor has occurred. So the service provider really needs to know that multi-factor has occurred. And this is where the multi-factor authentication, the profile comes into effect. It's really about signaling the fact that multi-factor has occurred and that the service provider wants to know that it has occurred. So there's a mechanism. SAML provides a mechanism. It's the authentication context, which has got a standard all on its own. This documents a mechanism for a SAML service provider to request additional information about how the identity provider authenticated the user and how the IDP should respond. Never really implemented for many reasons, mainly because it was way too complex and too many options. So the MFA profile was defined instead, or as a wrapper around the authentication context, providing a simpler approach to using the authentication context that's consistent across all federations. So standard layer implemented a service provider to request SFA or MFA when the authentication occurs for the IDP to respond that it did occur or respond with an error that it did not occur. So we've got this little map here. The user, unauthenticated user attempts to access a service. The user is sent back to the IDP to log in, and the service provider requires, in this case, single factor authentication profile to be adhered to. The user logs in with their strong password, which meets that single factor authentication requirement, and the IDP sends back to the service provider. The user has successfully logged in and has achieved the single factor authentication requirements. If the user can't achieve that single factor authentication requirement, they send back an error to the service provider, and the service provider can then deal with that particular error. If you replace SFA with MFA, it's exactly the same flow. It's just that the identity provider needs to ensure that the user does a multi-factor authentication at login. So a generic SAML authentication request will look like below. It's just very simple. Tells you where it's from, what the service is, and very basic information sent in a standard authentication process, where it's not requesting any authentication requirements on the authentication process. Stepping that up, if we want the IDP to do something and force it to indicate that multi-factor authentication has occurred, we need to get the service provider to, get back, to add this green chunk to the authn request, and that's fairly simple to do with a standard shibboleth service provider. You add that to the authentication request, send that request off to the IDP. If the IDP can force the user to do multi-factor, it should respond with the same authentication context, and everything is good. If it can't get the authentication to be multi-factor, then it will send back an error message, and again, the error needs to be dealt with by the service provider. So what that looks like, if we get an error back, and this is one service that's already signaling its requirement for multi-factor, which is the National Library of Medicine, the electronic research admin site, and it was sent back an error from an IDP where they couldn't log in. It says log into the NIH systems requires multi-factor authentication. Either your institute doesn't support it or it hasn't been set up for yourself. Contact the support people at your organization to get this sorted out. So they've done a really good job on dealing with organizations that don't have the multi-factor authentication signaling occurring. And they really need to have that signal to indicate that it has occurred to meet their legal requirements in the US. So each enterprise IDP implements authentication context for OASIS security, assertion market language, and some not at all. So this is a bit more detail. AF is implemented and tested an enhancement on our rapid IDP for proxy mode to Azure. So we can do it with Azure fairly easily. There's a bit of a translation that needs to occur, but it is doable. For Okta, it's much more tricky because they don't actually use the authentication context. They use an attribute value to send back what actually occurred. So we need to do a bit more work with those guys, but it can be done. You can pull apart the response and see what actually occurred. So we've started rolling it out for IDP customers, and we'll continue, and we expect it to be available for all IDPs sometime next year, or by next year. The other question is what level or what type of multi-factor authentication is acceptable. And we've been going around doing a tour, talking to our IDPs, and we're saying that the use of SMS is not acceptable as a second factor anymore. It's not considered secure, it's phishable. And we expect that the REFEDs MFA profile will be strengthened to state that SMS is no longer a suitable authentication option for a second factor. Most of our universities are either disabling the SMS option or limiting to a very small number of end users. It really needs to be a phishing resistance multi-factor authentication that is being provided by the organizations to be effective in this space. So where is your organization? Have you started? Which populations, to which services, and to AF and EduGain services? and what MFA options have been enabled for your users. Those are the sort of questions we're asking our universities as they roll out their MFA. And are we done yet? So the next part of it is your assurance. Let's get through that. So the assurance framework, this is another framework, and it's actually required by your pseudo-anonymous access and your personalized access. So they're all starting to come together, these frameworks. And this particular framework also needs organizations to be doing or meeting the baseline expectations. So there's a bit of a hierarchy of stuff happening here. For the assurance framework, it's to manage the risk related to access control of services. The relying party of the research and education federations need to make decisions on how much trust the assertion made by an IDP is done and their back-end credential service provider. So REFEDs have developed the assurance framework for expressing common identity federation, for expressing it using common identity federation protocols. And we have the assurance framework, a link there. So for the AF, we're replacing our old assurance values, which were these things, with newer values. Sorry, I'm too quick. With the new ones that are part of the assurance framework, which look at identifier uniqueness, identity assurance, and attribute assurance. The assurance of the authentication is not covered by the specifications because it's covered by the MFA protocol and the single factor profile. So we've sort of come up with this bit of an onboarding journey for a student, an employee, or a visitor. We've got a new employee. The first thing we do at the university is do some identity validation. So show us your passport, your driver's license, have your police check done, etc. Identifiers are assigned to the user. So we start generating a unique user ID for the user, and we issue those credentials. And again, we need to verify that the user is the same person that we did the identity validation for. So we're not issuing the credentials to someone who looks like the person we did the identity validation for. And then we start providing access to that particular user for the systems and services that are entitled to use. Wrapped around all of that is site security. So we have mechanisms in place to protect the systems and credentials used by the users. And these mechanisms must be well documented and maintained. So that's our little sort of diagram that we've been taking to the universities to say this is what we need to be doing for the assurance framework. This describes how the CSP expresses the identity represented in a single natural person if the mapping of identity to person remains the same over time. So identify uniqueness. So how long, or is the user's identifier ever going to change while they're at the university? Email is a really bad example of an identifier because it's going to change over time. It may change. So we look at ensuring that a unique identifier is provided that won't change, won't be reissued, etc. We have the identity assurance. This is low, medium, or high, and this is about how well the credentialing is done, what documentation has been reviewed, what processes are in place to check that that documentation is correct and current. And attribute assurance, this is about when a person is changing their roles at the university or leaving the university. How long does it take for your identity provider to reflect that change in status of the user? So for a student who's leaving the university, is it 30 days that they have their student account before they become an alumni? or is it 1 day before the system sort of picks it up and says, you're no longer a student, you're an alumnus. So there's a whole raft of values that are provided through the EduPerson assurance attribute, which map to each of those particular aspects of the assurance framework. The first one is, are you actually supporting or doing the framework? So if you just provide the prefix, which is, sorry, back, where is it? I'm with the prefix up here, but if you're doing the framework, you need to provide just a blank HTTPS, it's refeds.org/RAF. And then you start tacking on these things, ID unique, no reassign, etc. And we've actually got all of this implemented as a, we call it a script in our attribute resolver for Shibboleth to provide these values automatically based on very minimal information coming out of the IDP. And the fact that the IDP has said that they are doing a lot of these other activities.
Hello.
Yep.
Yes, study how you enforce this framework in the universities. I mean, there are some automated softwares that that are configured in a way that after 31 days the user will be automatically converted into alumni when they leave. What is the onboarding procedure in the universities? How they keep track that the student is still the student or he has not left the university? Because in our case, sometimes the
a lot of
users remain in the Active Directory for long number of years until we don't disable them or delete them.
Yeah, so a lot of universities have spent a lot of money on getting a identity management system that can automate that stuff, or they've built them themselves. So they have processes that run every night. Has this course finished? Has the user completed the requirements for that course? If they have completed their requirements for the course, and have they finished that course, then they're automatically transformed into a alumni, and that information flows from the student information system to the identity system on a regular basis.
Yeah, can you give some example of some IDM systems or IDP systems that universities are using? So actually we also need looking for some solution like that through which we can automate the user provisioning, deprovisioning in the universities. We can also automate this procedure.
Yeah, let me get back to you on that one. I'll reach out to some of my university colleagues and find out what they're using at their universities. Okay. I do work with a number of universities that haven't got much of a budget, so they're probably doing it on a shoestring with something fairly cheap. There's also a free identity management tool, which in Common Push is for their smaller universities. So I'll get some information on that for you as well.
Hello, Terry. How are you? I'm Nafiu from BDREN.
Yep.
Okay, I have a similar question to add with that, because most of the our universities in Bangladesh are using mainly Google directory, as they're using the Google Mail service for the education, which is free for our country. And then again, some of them are using Azure AD. So in this case, Azure AD doesn't create problem when I am trying to log in with the Shibboleth identity in the publisher services like Emerald, IEEE, or some other services like this. But most of the universities are using the Google directory, as the directory is being created as soon as they're creating the emails. Okay, for their students or teachers or something like this. But the problem I am facing that most of the users are using Google Chrome. So when they are trying to log in with Google Chrome, and if another profile of them, like their personal Gmail or something like this, is being logged in the browser, at that time the error comes that app not configured for the user, without being prompt for the user to put their email and password or username and password for login, and that comes from probably from the browser cache. So in order to solve it, is there any have you find similar issues, or is there any way to solve it? Because if I am the service provider, I have the option, because when I'm provisioning my service, I'm not taking the identity from the browser's cache. But if I'm not the service owner, or if I'm using another person's service or another people's service, then the problem occurs. So how do I address this issue?
Yes, I've noticed Google have changed the way they do stuff recently, and it's annoying me as well. I haven't got a solution for you at the moment, but happy to discuss that after the conference, because that's one Google university that would be probably in the same boat as you are, which we haven't really surfaced yet. So happy to take that one offline, because we're nearly out of time for this session. If you reach out to me after, I'll try and reach out to you after the conference, and we'll have a bit more of a discussion about that.
Yes, that will be very much helpful, because the number of user base is huge in here, and the number of problem the users are facing, because you see it. I mean, 4 to 5 million students are using here, so the number is too much. I mean, the problem that occurs to them is too much for me to personally handle, and I have to tell each and every one of them that please log out from your Google profile, or log out from your personal Gmail from the Google profile, then log in with your institutional account into the Google profile or Google Chrome profile, then you can. And providing this solution one by one, or making a webinar, even though I'm trying to educate them that the one solution that I had, just you need to log out from the Google profile, Chrome profile, and you need to log in with your personal institutional account into the Google Chrome profile, and that only solves the problem. And I have to tell each and every one of the problem that they're facing, because I am the single point of contact if they're having any problem. That's the issue, because we are providing the IDP as a service to them. So if any problem occurs, the single point of contact has become me, and that is becoming very much troublesome for me.
Yeah, I can understand that. I've actually started to not use Chrome. It was a good browser, but they've really mucked it up with this identity stuff.
Yes, that's it. I have also told them to use a different browser instead of Chrome.
I've got about 6 browsers on my computer, so I get lots of choice.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'll talk about it with a different time frame. Maybe I'll mail you.
Well, next week we might have some time once this conference is finished.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. Okay, assurance framework. So that's that one. So actions for our IDPs: determine the identify uniqueness, identity assurance, and attribute assurance for the users, and populate into the edge person assurance attribute. So we're doing a lot of that work for them with our Rapid IDP or our hosted IDP. IDP script, which we've got, will complete the assurance profile, ensure consistent and complete assurance values are released. And it's not required for all users, and different levels will be applied to different users with different roles. Getting to Espresso, which is the highest assurance level that you can get with this particular profile, is a lot of effort. So don't put all that effort into trying to make it for all users, just only those who really require it. And most services aren't requiring the federation, the assurance levels yet, but it's coming. So is there identity proofing occurring? Who owns the identity proofing process? Is it based on any standards? What's it being used for? And how can the AAF help? And we're looking at trying to either put in an API that can be used to call out to get that high level assurance using some third-party stuff. Green Access, I think, is one of them, third-party companies that do all this high-level identity assurance stuff. We're also looking at setting up a bit of a framework ourselves to get our universities to self-audit through a guided self-audit that can say that this university is meeting these standards, and it will put our hand in our heart saying that we are doing this stuff appropriately. For this one, you want to make sure that you're getting the universities to do the right thing, not just sort of fast tracking it. So requiring research, the REFEDs assurance framework. We are working with our research community to require these high levels of assurance for a number of reasons: to access personal information, particularly around medical records, to access high-end or high-cost research equipment, indigenous significant information and data. To access that requires a high level of assurance, and to access funding, research funding resources, and many more use cases to have people do the high level of assurance. But as we move forward, there'll be more need for this stuff. So finally, supporting global standards to ensure researchers can work and collaborate successfully globally. All national education and research identity federations must support these common global standards. That's why I'm out talking about them, promoting them, and getting you guys to implement them. It's about making services work for researchers, no matter where the researcher is and no matter where the service is. It's about service providers know and trust their users. So credential assurance and identity assurance helps in that space. It's all participants are doing best practice, which is the baseline stuff, and attributes are flowing. So core attributes for national federations and entity categories, which live on top of those core attributes, to work in a global attribute exchange. So that's policy stuff. There's a lot there, and we've already identified a number of areas where we can continue on these conversations and discussions, and I'm happy to do so beyond this this particular meeting. So hopefully you've got something out of today, and are there any further questions? It's been a fairly heavy sort of duty tour of REFEDs policy stuff. And there's, I'll be making these slides available, and there's a whole bunch of links in there that you can use to dig into these things further yourselves and start to implement them or work out how to implement them. And if you're having any issues or questions, happy to talk to you via Slack or email or whatever mechanism that works for you to contact us.
Yes, Terry, I have a question about your Nectar Cloud. That is it based on OpenStack?
Yes, it is.
And anyone can log in it from your universities or faculty as a faculty or a student, or is there any restriction on it that they should have a special attribute to log in on your cloud system?
No, there's no restriction. It's any user in the Federation can log in, and they will get 2 nodes for a period of 3 months as a trial. If they want to get more, they have to go and apply for more. So let me just show you that. I can get that back.
Terry, is this possible that I can get a demo account on it for just 1-2 days? Because we are also in the process of developing this cloud in our data center. So I want to show this procedure to my seniors, to my team managers, that how the IAM will work with our cloud infrastructure.
Yeah, and I can hook you up with the guys who actually run that service in Australia as well.
Okay, I will message you on Slack for that because.
Yep. But let me just show you that again.
Yeah, can you show this the procedure once again that you were showing, because now there are some person interested to look at it.
Yep. So it's allocations based, and I have a request in. So, this is my current one, I think. when I first started, I got my 2 nodes. I could do with them what I wanted to for a period of 3 months, and then that would stop. Then I had to put in a request to get additional uses, additional service. And I've had this request going since, when was it? I first put this one in. I can't recall when. It was about 8 years ago that I put my original request in, and they keep approving it, so I can keep. So it's allocations based. I can request for more or less resource if I so choose. I can tie it to my research activities. So it's really about do you have a funded research activity from your university, from the state, from the government? And because this is a government provided service, then they're willing to provide this sort of research resource for it. And this then ensures that it's not being sort of completely smashed by everybody. So, and I do have another, where are these? So I had this P32, so I was a 32nd user to try this thing. And if we look at this project, compute overview, it says I had 0. So my initial 3 months has long expired, so that initial free trial is evaporated, and I now have to go and do a allocation request to get service on this thing. So it takes an ask for project, my contact email, allocation title, gives me little question marks where I can find out what I'm supposed to fill in this space. It's basically 9 pages of this stuff. A description about what I'm doing for my research activity, the field of research that I'm doing it for, gives me sort of a number of drop downs that I can pick and choose. And the research, the AADC folk use this for their reporting back to the government on who's using it for what purposes. What supported institutes, so what organisations am I working with, and it gives you a whole raft of organisations that I can say that I'm working with, say this Aquila from New Zealand. They're supporting my activity if I so chose. Or I could propose a new organisation. Who are the chief investigators? Who's running this thing? What sort of project support is there? Is it an ARDC program? Is it an NCRIS, which is a National Compute Research Infrastructure group, which we're now part of? Has it got a research grant? So is there any type of grant that's helping provide funding for your research activity? Again, all of this is about reporting back to the government about what's being used and who's using it. And then the continue button, which then sends off the request to the ARDC folk to say, well, this is a valid use of the ARDC research service, and we're going to allocate you whatever you've requested or some percentage of for 12 months. And every 12 months you have to come back and then re-request it. And they're fairly generous with handing it out. So I've had my allocation for probably 8 to 10 years now. And they keep saying, yes, you're happy to keep providing me virtual machines to play with and test and experiment on. And on those machines, I've done a lot of development of our IDP installer, etc.
What else service we can get from the cloud, like Dockers and Kubernetes and other applications?
So in this one, we'll go back to here. Go back to object. We've got compute. So we've got some volumes, we've got networking stuff. What else we got? We've now got a container infrastructure. So they've got, no, I haven't requested a container or anything, so I can't actually create a container. But they've got orchestration stuff in here, stacks, all sorts of stuff that I'm just sort of guessing what this is. I've got a database. I can run up a database instance for you. Again, I haven't actually requested a database instance. I just run up my own instances. What else we got? Identity. And they also have a bunch of pre-built applications. So I've got Docker containers, got all sorts of fun stuff that have been shared with various folk. And I didn't even know half this stuff lives. I got Jupyter Labs, Lamps, WordPresses, studios. What else we got in the application? Environments. Oh, that's just my own stuff, I think. Yeah, I got my own little DNS service, got my own little zone. So I can create all these little DNS entries, a bunch of A records and C names and so forth for all of my stuff.
And do you offer any PaaS services? Like, for example, we need a antivirus tool for our VM. Can we configure it by this dashboard as well? The PaaS services like already built-in tools like some web view or some antivirus tools.
I think so. I can't really hear the question properly. Sorry.
I'm asking that do you offer PaaS services also from this? Like, for example, if anyone want to get antivirus for their VM that is configured on this system.
All right. No, I think there's a big warning saying you need to do your own security stuff. So they do some monitoring, but they haven't got the. They do some monitoring, but they don't have their own. Well, actually, I'm not sure what they do with regards to security. Again, if I put you in contact with the owners of this service, they can go through all the details and what it is they provide.
Okay, I will message you on Slack for that.
Yep. Okay, well, I think we've gone half an hour over time. It's now nearly, 4 o'clock in Brisbane. So, again, hopefully you've got something out of my presentation today. And tomorrow we have Federation updates. I'm not sure who's going to turn up for those. Not sure if hopefully we'll get a few people from other federations come and tell us what they're doing. And I've got a very short update on what's happening in the AAF and hope to see something from what's happening in Pakistan to see where you guys are at. Okay, so thanks everyone for attending. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. And I'm really disappointed that I can't be there with you.